Okay, hello and welcome to another live stream returning back to Premier League action. Just before I start, can I just double check everything is working okay and you can hear me, see my screen, everything like that. So I'll just wait a minute or so just for that confirmation. For those of you that are here waiting, thank you very much for joining. We got 5 games to go through, quite a lot of angles. So yeah, we'll start that as soon as possible. How's it looking, guys? Everything working? All good? Expected. But yeah, as I say, thank you, and I'll happily go through them. So, without wasting any more time, is Crystal Palace against Liverpool. 12:30 kickoff at Selhurst Park, first game of the weekend. With the winless streak was extended for Oliver Glasner after they were defeated at Goodison Park. While Liverpool beat Wolves 2-1 last time out in the so Kanate error leading to goal. They were relatively secure. And the same can be said for the midweek game against Bologna. Sort of a short at the back. Bologna had it's a bit of a banana skin fixture. This obviously the early kickoffs are never ideal to bet on, but potential leans, potential angles to go into. The first one being Palace over 20.5 tackles, which is at 1.72. 1.72. I think it's a pretty low. Expected to be maybe a couple of Palace, even though it was at so aggressively high. He's averaging the most tackles per 90 of any Palace player. Aggressively high. He's averaging the most tackles per 90 of any Palace player. This season, he's made at least 3 tackles in 5 out of 6 league games. So obviously quite an aggressive player. And notably in this matchup or in this game, he draws the matchup of Luis Diaz, who is Liverpool's most dispossessed player. So an ideal matchup. Last time these two faced off, Munoz made 6 tackles in the last head-to-head. He is understandably quite short. He's priced at 1.4 to make 3 tackles, which is best price with 365. So we'd sort of have to be looking at what can we double that with. And I think the sort of logical selection for me would be to go sort of Liverpool fouls in midfield, so targeting McAllister and Gravenberch, just because those two sort of see the majority of involvement on the defensive end. I think they're sort of tasked with getting in a lot of duels, and they are very aggressive in their approach. Gravenberch has made the most fouls for Liverpool under Arne Slot, and I think notably he's also played 90 minutes in pretty much every game. So 90 minutes in midfield against the likes of Eze, Nketiah. Not convinced. I'm not really entirely sure he plays in the sort of midfield duo, but it's a good matchup for him regardless. And if we double that with Munoz's tackles, that comes out at 1.8, which is obviously a nice price, backable. Whereas if we look at sort of McAllister, he's coming at 1.66, bit too short. Luis Diaz as well, 1.66, bit too short. Something's wrong, quite enough. Okay, 1 second. So can you just confirm, did you hit any of the first game so far? If not, I will redo that. I think I am having a few issues, so I might just restart the stream. Lucky you said actually. Thank you for saying. Seems better now. Okay, which bit did cut off? How long ago did it sort of cut off? Okay, okay, now I did got off earlier. Okay, perfect, thanks. I think I'm just gonna go ahead with it then. So if you missed the sort of earlier bit, basically I just said the Crystal Palace tackles line looks pretty decent value at over 20.5 and 1.72. Focusing on a player, I think Munoz draws sort of best matchup against Luis Diaz, who is the most dispossessed player for Liverpool. He is quite short for tackles. He's 1.4 to make three. So if we're looking to double that, we could look at Gravenberch foul, which has landed in I think 5 out of 7 in all competitions for Liverpool. I'll just double check that. I know he has blanked in his last two, but I think the sort of matchup against Palace is a good one for him, and I really like his foul price as a double. Um, Liverpool tackles. Yeah, so he's made a foul in 6 out of 8, blanked in his last two. But as I say, Palace good matchup, and he has made the most fouls under Arne Slot since he took over. So really like that as a double. The next three angles I have are all unders actually, so a bit of a different approach for this game. But as I say, early kickoff, first game of the weekend, bit of a banana skin. The first is to do with the injury report. So obviously I mentioned Jefferson Lerma debuted as a centre back in the last game against Everton, and with Chris Richards still out, I expect that sort of to persist. So he's currently priced at 1.4 to have a shot, which I think is extremely short for a centre back. So I'm looking at the under. You can actually take him to have under 0.5 shots at 2.75, so close to 2 to 1, which I think is a pretty good price against Liverpool. He did have a shot in the last game against Everton, which was from a corner, but I think in this game against Liverpool, obviously Palace will naturally struggle with progression. I think as we saw against United, they were very easy to control. They really sort of lacked an outlet. I think that will persist against Liverpool. Um, the only way I can really see this happening or sort of see him having a shot is from a set piece or a corner. And Liverpool are a very aerially dominant team. They've got the likes of Van Dijk, Kanate. They're a very physical team, and they don't really give up too many of those set pieces under Arne Slot. So I think a price close to 2 to 1 for a centre back to not have a shot against Liverpool is pretty much instant play. It just looks great value. Last season he actually played as a centre back against Liverpool as well, and he didn't have a shot. So data looks really good for this. I think it's more of just 365 have priced him a bit wrong because of his sort of positional change. They haven't picked up on it, so we can try and take advantage of that value. Next is for Robertson to not make a foul, so under 0.5 fouls, which is at 1.83. He did make a foul in the last game against Bologna, but his fouls aren't really, it was more of like a cynical foul. So those situations don't really occur too often in the game, and he rarely finds himself in a position to sort of stop those kind of attacks. So he's made a foul in 2 out of 6 league games this season, which saw him matched up against Kudus in one and Elanga on the other, who are more sort of direct opponents in the sense that they'll look to beat their man, they'll be very aggressive against Robertson. But now he draws the matchup of uh, Munoz. It's hard to really give him a matchup because you've got Nketiah who plays more of an inside forward, and Munoz will hold width. Um, Munoz is not a direct player at all. He's when he gets the ball, he rarely does, but when he does, he sort of looks back, looks for passes, doesn't dribble as much as sort of Kudus or Alanga. So I don't really see Robertson getting in too many duels with him. If we look into sort of left backs against Palace this season, 5 out of 8 have not made a foul. And yeah, I think with Robertson, he's not a very aggressive player in that sense. He's more of like a sort of back off. rather than an engaged kind of defender when it comes to one-on-one situations. So I think getting him close to evens to not register a foul is pretty good value. Um, in addition, he has sort of had his minutes restricted this season, with Tsimikas often coming off the bench to replace him. We saw that in the last game. He only got 72 minutes against Bologna. So I think if Robertson is to start, again, he'll be looking at sort of 75, 70 minutes range, which is ideal to back the unders. Um, Next is Liverpool shots, and this is an interesting change that we've seen from Arne Slot, which is obviously the change in role for Trent Alexander-Arnold. So under Klopp, he was obviously such a massive component into like a contributing component into the success in the final third, but that hasn't really remained the same under Slot. And I think the perfect way to explain that would be this season he's averaging zero point 0.8 shots per game. Last season he was averaging 1.6 shots per game. So it's sort of attacking influences halved in that respect. And I think that's important. This season he's only had one shot on target, and that came against Wolves on the weekend, which is a pretty timid shot from a free kick. Um, he's actually blanked on shots in 3 out of 8 games, so he hasn't even had a shot in 3 out of 8 games. And as I say, one shot on target this season in 8 games. So he isn't sort of he hasn't been given the same responsibility as he had last season. And because of that, I again like his unders prices for shots on target. He's currently 1.57 to register under 0.5 shots on target with 365. Probably a bit too short to back as a single there. And I think with these kind of bets, when you back unders, you'll have to double it with something from another game, which is a bit of a pain. But I like that as a single, as something to double with something. I think 1.57 for something that's landed in 7 out of 8 games, pretty solid value. And again, I think 365 have been a bit slow to sort of catch up to how Liverpool have changed this season. So leaning towards the unders for the first game, but that doesn't persist for the stream. Next game, Leicester against Bournemouth, 3 p.m. kickoff at the King Power. Um, all three newly promoted sides are still winless, but Leicester have drawn 3 of their 6, so they sit in 17th, just outside the drop zone, which is probably a good thing. I think Steve Cooper will probably take that. There was a sort of lot of uncertainty surrounding them um, at the start of the season, and I think they'll just be happy that they've at least drawn a few games rather than lost all 6. Most recently, they played against Arsenal at the Emirates, and they were beaten 4-2. Although I would say that scoreline probably doesn't do Arsenal justice at all. They had 36 shots, 17 corners, 4.6 xG, so they put up some pretty ridiculous numbers against Leicester, and it was Hermanson who got man of the match um, with 13 saves. So could have been worse. I think Leicester sort of quite lucky they only conceded 4 in the end, which is quite a ridiculous statement. For Bournemouth, they've looked really confident against Southampton. They bounced back really nicely after 2 straight losses. And I've been really impressed with them so far, actually. I think despite losing Solanke, they've looked a really competent side, especially in the attacking third. And I fancy them here against Leicester. Again, I do think they're a bit undervalued there. Priced at over evens to win this game, which I think looks nice. It was a similar story against Southampton. They were 1.7, or they opened at 1.7 and continued to shorten. And I think that might be the case again here. I do think that price shortens. I also do think that this game will have a lot of goals in it. Both teams' scores landed in 4 out of 6 for Bournemouth and 6 out of 6 for Leicester. The only games Bournemouth haven't scored in was against Liverpool, where they lost 3-0, but they did create a lot of chances, and against Chelsea. So tougher matchups in this, but they have conceded in every game, which is notable because Leicester have scored in every game. Um, and I think it's important because Steve Cooper has obviously sort of brought a more pragmatic approach to Leicester, but they have looked and been quite efficient in the final third. They scored 2 against Arsenal. I think obviously one was from a set piece, one was a sort of banger from James Justin. So you won't get those every week. But it is worth noting that Leicester are quite good at fashioning chances, and they should be able to do that again against Bournemouth side, who haven't been exactly watertight. I think they've been more focused on outscoring their opponents. And again, I think it's a winnable game for both sides. Of course, I fancy Bournemouth, but both should look to be sort of attacking and front-footed in their approach. As I say, Bournemouth have looked competent in the attacking third, and Evan Nelson got his first goal against Southampton. I think that'll be a big boost for him, sort of confidence-wise. First game against his for his new club. So I think for me, the first angle that I've got in mind actually is for both teams to score and over 2.5 goals, which is at 1.9. I think that is very big considering how sort of effective both sides have been so far in the final third, but also how they've struggled defensively. As I say, I think it's a winnable game for both. Leicester at home will obviously sort of look to leverage their home advantage, leverage the home support, try sort of put on a show. And yeah, I think a sort of 2-1, 3-1 scoreline is pretty likely here, just as we saw against Southampton in Bournemouth's last game. So first angle for me, both teams to score and over 2.5 goals. Sticking with the sort of idea that there will be a lot of chances at both ends, I also like Tavernier to have a shot on target, which is priced at 1.83 with Bet365. Um, I took this against Southampton and I'll sort of parrot some of the research there. But this bet has now landed in 6 out of 7 games, with the only failure being at Anfield. So obviously a very, very tough matchup. I think Leicester are a great matchup to target shots. As I said, against Arsenal, they were incredibly leaky. They conceded so many chances, so many corners, and Hermanson bailed them out essentially. With Tavernier, you'll have sort of attacking midfield player playing centrally on free kicks, guaranteed, I would say, at least 80 minutes. Based on that alone, considering the matchup against Leicester, I just think 1.83 is massive. And that's before even considering that this has landed in 6 out of 7 games. Against Southampton, he had one shot, one on target. So he is quite efficient with his sort of shots. I think he strikes the ball very cleanly. He doesn't sort of overhit it. You rarely see him sort of smash one out the stadium. So I like targeting his shot on target prices as opposed to his shot prices. Um, if we look into a sort of shot map this season, we can see that he's having a lot of long shots getting out sort of from outside the box. He will be on free kicks. But he's also getting into good areas in the box as well. You can see 4 of his shots are from inside the 6 yard box, including his only goals. So he is getting forward into some great positions. If he gets the minutes, I can really get behind this price. But there is nothing to sort of suggest that he'll get like a 60 minutes and then be subbed because that just hasn't happened this season yet. Another player that caught my eye against Arsenal for Leicester was Caleb Okoli, who is the centre back. There wasn't really much. I didn't really know too much about him actually before watching him, but against Arsenal he caught my eye because he was very, very aggressive in his approach and he seemed very willing to duel against Havertz. Now in that game he didn't commit a foul, but it was a very tough matchup in that sense because he was sort of in his own box for the majority of the game, as Leicester were just sort of defending, especially towards the end. Looking into his data from this season, he's made 6 fouls in 6 games, with over 0.5 fouls in 4 out of 6 games. But the target here is actually the matchup against Bournemouth. I think you'll find duels against Evan Nelson, obviously the striker for Bournemouth, who has been drawing 1.8 fouls per 90. He drew 3 fouls against Southampton. He sort of looks to invite contact. He gets his opposition centre back very close to him, invites contact in that sense, and Taylor Harwood-Bellis, who we backed in the last game against Southampton, made a foul on him. So Caleb Okoli is 1.57 for a foul with Sky. Again, bit too short. Um, if we're sort of looking at ways we can double that, though, I think we could sort of look at the angle of Evan Nelson to draw a foul or someone like Semenyo to draw a foul who we know will have a safer minutes floor. So I think anything over 1.5 is good value in my opinion, because we can double that with sort of correlated stats that sort of bump the price up. In an ideal world, we'll be looking at sort of odds against price if we can do something like Caleb Okoli foul, Evan Olsen foul drawn. I haven't had a look into what price that is. I would imagine it's sort of around the 1.9 mark. I think that would be a good value play. Again, it's a 3 o'clock game, so we don't get full markets. However, I do think that there's a good amount of potential to sort of back fouls in this game, particularly if Jordan Ayew starts. Now, he's been a player that I've kept tabs on for a while now because he's so effective at drawing fouls, so effective at inviting contact and going down very easily to sort of drag his team up the pitch. He didn't start against Arsenal, which I thought was a bit surprising at the time, but in hindsight, I think it sort of makes sense. He's not a transitional threat at all. I don't think he would have had very much of an impact on the game. Whereas Buonanotte was sort of more direct as an opponent, able to sort of get his team up the pitch very quickly. So I think that makes sense in that respect. But I would imagine Jordan Ayew returns for this game because it's a different kind of game, and he should feature on the right wing. So I would imagine it's Mavididi on the left, Vardy up top, and Ayew on the right. If that does sort of come into fruition, it will be Milos Kerkez as his direct opponent. He's been good for fouls this season, but he is understandably quite short. So for me, this will just be a lean for now. We'll have to sort of have keep tabs on the prices, but we'll be targeting Kerkez, Christie, and Utara if he is to start as the left winger. See what their foul prices are, and look to double that with Ayew to draw fouls. So that's all for the 3 o'clock games. Next game is Everton against Newcastle, 5:30 kickoff on Saturday at Goodison Park. I think the main talking point will be that it's the return for Anthony Gordon to his former club. Everton finally got off the mark in their last game against Crystal Palace, thanks to a brace from Dwight McNeil, and I think that'll be a massive relief for Sean Dyche, looking to sort of hopefully kick on from that, build some momentum, get the ball rolling. For Newcastle, they had a midweek game in the EFL Cup against Wimbledon, which they won 1-0. Main talking point from that would be Fabian Schär took penalties. I think with um, Isak out of this game, with Callum Wilson out, there's sort of gap to fill in that sense of who's going to take penalties. So I think it'll be Gordon's sort of number one choice. If he gets subbed around, let's say, 75th minute, Shaw will be the next in line, which I think is important. So that's a sort of lesson to take for the season going forward. Prior to that game against Wimbledon, they drew one each to Man City at St James's Park. So they were afforded a sort of bit of rotation midweek. We saw no Bruno Guimaraes, no Tonali, no Gordon, and Barnes was subbed up to 45 minutes. So we would expect those players to sort of return to the starting lineup. In terms of the injury report, we've got Isak set to miss out again with a fractured toe. Trippier too, not expected to start this game. Um, for Everton, it's better news. They've got pretty much full strength side now. I think they've got Branthwaite, who returned in the last game, Mikalenko and Jack Harrison, who came off the bench. Patterson is the only one who's sort of doubtful, so I think that's a big boost for Sean Dyche. Sort of got a full contingent now, and they sort of marked that with a win in the last game, so they'll be looking to build on. I do actually quite fancy Everton in this game. I think it has the potential to be quite chaotic, quite duel heavy. You've got two teams that don't play a very possession based football. So because of that, I think the target sort of has to be shots, tackles, and fouls. We get full market, so we can target these stats with 365, but um, I've sort of taken a more player based approach, I would say, for this one. Um, if we look into Newcastle stats, I mentioned this last week, but they do struggle on the road compared to at home. They're sort of completely different side, home and away. And you can sort of make a case for Everton being the same as well. I think they look much more confident, much more assured at home on compared to being on the road. And that's reflected in their sort of shots stats. So if we look into the last 30 games, they're averaging 12.4 shots. Filtering that to home only, we see a slight uptick to 13.75. So straight away, that sort of becomes a sort of angle of interest. Um, However, it's worth noting that just because I think it's a good bet in the sense that it will come in, when we look at the Bet365 shot line, it does look very, very high. So I think it's more about identifying where the value is. So I would probably actually be inclined to avoid Everton shots in this scenario. However, I do have an alternative, and that is Newcastle goal kicks. Obviously, a stat that is correlated to shots. If we look into the head-to-head data, Newcastle had 9 goal kicks at home last season in this game against Everton, and 13 goal kicks at Goodison Park. You can get 9 goal kicks or more for Newcastle at 2.0, which I think is a nice angle. Sort of plays into the fact that Everton are very direct in their approach. They do favour long shots and crossing into the box, and in turn that sort of leads to sort of a lot of goal kicks, a disproportionate amount of goal kicks for their opponents. Sticking with shots, as I said, I like to target sort of players, and we've seen Dwight McNeil shift into a slightly different role over the last month or so, and that's him playing as a sort of advanced midfielder, more centrally as opposed to on the left wing. He scored a brace in his last game, obviously, against Crystal Palace, and he also scored against Aston Villa. So he scored 3 goals in 3 games. Should be full of confidence because of that. Um, but the overall change from Sean Dyche has been to integrate Iliman Ndiaye, obviously the new summer signing, into the team. And it was against Bournemouth actually, where he played Ndiaye on the left and McNeil centrally. So as a sort of attacking midfielder, a similar position to what we saw Decore play in last season. But instead of McNeil being like a box crasher, he's more of like sort of edge of the box creator, facilitator, that kind of thing. So he gets into good positions in the box, but the main sort of thing that draws me towards backing him is the fact that he's very, very central and he plays a lot around zone 14, sort of around the edge of the box and in the half spaces. Secondly, he has very good ball striking ability. As we saw against Crystal Palace, his sort of technique was incredible, and we did see that a lot last season. It was more from a sort of from a left wing position where he's looking to cross the ball in as opposed to shoot. When he's playing more centrally, obviously he's going to have a better opportunity to shoot, and I think that's reflected in his shot prices or shot on target stats since moving to the central role. So against Bournemouth, which was his first game in that position, he had 2 shots, one on target. Then against Leicester in the preceding game, he had 4 shots with one on target. Most recently, he had 3 shots, two goals, and two on target against Palace. Um, so since the move, obviously his shot on target price, his shot on target stats have been inflated. I think he's just one to target, should be full of confidence from the goal, and he's priced at 1.9 with 365 to register a shot on target. So given that standard in every game since moving to his new position, I just think that has to be a play. Also looking into the stats, his minutes are very, very secure. So he's only not played the full 90 in his last game, but that was with Everton leading. So obviously he was some from more defensive player. Um, so as I say, attacking midfielder on free kicks should be in for at least 80 minutes as a floor. At home to Newcastle struggle. They concede a lot of shots to their opponents. I think 1.9 is just an instant play. It just looks great value on the surface. As I said, I think it could be quite a duel heavy game. So I've got my eye on Newcastle to draw tackles from Tarkowski. Um, Tarkowski's been a sort of decent target over the course of last season because he gets in quite a lot of duels for a centre back. You don't really see centre backs as aggressive as he is. If we look into his head-to-head data against Newcastle, he made 6 tackles at St James's Park. whilst also being dribbled past once. So he attempted a tackle and didn't complete it, and he made two fouls as well. So he was heavily involved in the duels. Then at Goodison Park, he made two tackles and was dribbled past once. So two out of three tackles. Um, two tackles is currently priced at 1.66 with Bet365. Obviously a bit too short, but I do think even still that is very good value. And a sort of testament to that is this the same bet is 1.3 with Sky. So I like that as a sort of potential to double, or it could even be taken as a single. Um, especially when you consider that Tarkowski's landed at least two tackles in every home game so far this season. So he made two tackles against Brighton, but he was also booked in that game. He made five tackles against Bournemouth, which is obviously a great matchup, and two tackles against Crystal Palace. So landed in every home game, landed in both head-to-head games last season. I just like the matchup against Gordon as well. Um, if we look into the Man City against Newcastle game, Kanji had one out of two tackles completed. Ruben Diaz had one out of two tackles completed, um, also making two fouls. So those two were sort of quite heavily involved on the defensive front. Obviously, they didn't hit the two tackle mark, but that's obviously against Man City. Um, Newcastle saw a lot less of the ball than they will against Everton. The defenders will be a lot more involved in this game. So, um, as I say, I really, really like his tackle price is 1.66. I think just gonna wait for Ladbrokes to open up. I don't think they've opened up with a price yet. But if that is higher, if it is backable as a single, that would obviously be ideal. Now, obviously, I've mentioned McNeil sitting into a sort of attacking midfield role. And the sort of person who played in that role last season was Decore. Decore has been starting, so he's actually been shifted into a more defensive role um, alongside new signing Oro Mangala. So in the last two games, Decore's played the full 90 as a holding midfielder, um, with Gay on the bench, interesting Gay on the bench, um, which is a good sign. I think I would sort of expect interesting Gay to be the starter, but if Decore is going to be playing the full 90 as a defensive midfielder against Newcastle, especially, ideal. So he's priced at 1.8 to make two fouls. Again, I think Sky have been quite slow to sort of pick up on a positional change. He started in the last two games as the holding midfielder, and you can see three fouls against Leicester, three fouls against Crystal Palace. I would argue Newcastle are a much better matchup than both of those for targeting sort of fouls in midfield because you've got Bruno Guimaraes who's drawn at least two fouls in every game, and he should sort of be in direct duels with Decore. In addition to that, you've got the likes of Joe Linton, Tonali, Anthony Gordon, Harvey Barnes. You've got really, really good players for targeting fouls. Um, and Decore actually made the most fouls for Everton last season. He also ranked sixth out of all Premier League players for total fouls made, so it sort of is a testament to the aggression that he plays with. And it's worth noting that was in an advanced midfield role. So in a defensive midfield role, you sort of logically assume he gets in a lot more duels and therefore makes sort of fouls more attractive. So I think there's ladder potential there as well. If you consider two as 1.8 and he's landed three fouls in his last two games, could be one to sort of keep an eye on. I think he's 1.66 with Bet365 and 1.61 with Paddy, which I would say are sort of more fair prices. Um, so yeah, and that will be the last angle for Saturday. Moving on to Sunday, we've got Aston Villa against Man United, 2 o'clock televised kickoff at Villa Park. Man United have got a trip to Porto today, so that's something to sort of keep an eye on. And because of that, I think there's no sort of official plays yet. I think if Man United are to sort of receive a bit of injury news, it could change a lot. So we'll keep this section sort of a bit light, keep it sort of leans, but um, there is a lot to consider for both teams. So Aston Villa were held to a 2-2 draw against Ipswich on the weekend. Thought they were really underwhelming in that game, sort of defensively getting bypassed way too easily. But they bounced back fantastically against Bayern Munich midweek, beat them 1-0, and that should fill them with a ton of confidence going into this one. It's worth noting, however, that there was quite a lot of injury news to pick apart. So we had Jacob Ramsey withdrawn with injury, and Leon Bailey withdrawn for injury, and same for Onana. So those three come in as doubts for this game, and I think that changes a lot. If all three are to be ruled out, obviously Villa will be a completely different side that we've seen so far. So again, something to consider. For Man United, they were obviously dealt a damning defeat at Old Trafford, 3-0 to Spurs, in which Bruno Fernandes was sent off, but that red card has been rescinded, so he'll be available for this game. As I say, they've got the trip to Porto today, so one to keep an eye on. But in terms of the injury report, we've got Mainu who will probably miss out with this with a hamstring injury. So you sort of imagine a midfield pivot of Ugarte and Eriksen is in line to start on the weekend, barring any changes. Again, as I say, keeping it very light. But assuming Ugarte starts, I really like his foul prices. I think it's sort of quite an easy play at the moment, given how he plays. But I still think that there is value in his prices. He's currently 1.6 with Paddy to commit two fouls, I believe. Obviously too short, but if we're looking at the sort of players he matches up against, I think most notably it will be Morgan Rogers, um, who is a player who is very, very strong in his duels. He's a strong carrier of the ball, and he will occupy a very similar zone to Ugarte. If we just have a look a bit more into Ugarte, we can see in his first start he made six fouls against Barnsley, one foul against FC Twente in the Europa League, and then three fouls against Spurs. Um, Obviously, he's a player who likes to duel. He's very aggressive in his duels, often a bit too over eager to win the ball. And it was the sort of same story at PSG. He had 2.1 fouls per 90 in League One last season, 2.45 fouls in the season before. And if you think about the team he's playing in, it's a PSG side who obviously see a lot of the ball, extremely dominant in the League One. So it's been a change for him in the Premier League. I think he gets in a lot more duels. And because of that, if he's sort of given the same prices for fouls as he was at PSG, he's not playing in the same team. Obviously, Man United they control the ball a lot less. Naturally, that will lead to a lot more draws, fouls in midfield. So I do expect his sort of prices, even though they are already quite short, I think they will shorten even more as the season wears on. So it's sort of the right time to sort of take advantage of that now. If we look into Morgan Rogers, who is the sort of main target here in terms of the matchup, he's drawn a foul in 7 out of 8 games. As I say, he's a very strong carrier of the ball, and I think it's going to be a really good battle actually between him and Ugarte, two players who are very very aggressive. So I really like that. And what you can actually do is Ugarte two fouls and Rogers to be fouled just one time comes out at 1.83 with Paddy Power, which again thinks that's a really nice price. Next angle I've got is to take advantage of the Villa high line, and it's for Marcus Rashford to be caught offside. He's currently priced at 1.67 with Sky, which is obviously on the shorter end, but I would say even that price holds some great value. If we look into his data this season, he's been caught offside the most times for Man United, 6 times this season already, um, including each of his last three starts. So already that's something to keep in mind. If we look into the sort of fixtures, he had two offsides against Brighton, one offside against Spurs. And when you sort of consider that Brighton play an equally high line as Villa, same for Spurs, that looked really good actually. That's a really, really good sign. Looking into the previous head-to-head data between these two, he was caught offside twice at Villa Park and once at Old Trafford. So the data really, really sort of points to at least one offside for him with ladder potential based on the fact that he was caught twice offside against Villa last season and twice against Brighton in 60 minutes, who play a similar sort of approach in terms of keeping a very, very high line. Um, that's that's the sort of main angles for me, just those two. But I have got a few leads to consider. So obviously with Bailey and Jacob Ramsey out, that likely provides Philogene with a start. He started against Bayern on the right, and then when Ramsey came off, he moved over to the left, and then when Bailey went off, he moved back over to the right. So sort of a bit uncertain where he plays. But one thing that is for certain is he's a very, very good player at drawing contact, drawing fouls. In a similar vein to Morgan Rogers, but Philogene is sort of more, he's more willing to go down and buy the free kick, whereas Rogers would sort of prefer to carry on. He's a bit more stronger with the draws. If he starts on the left, he'll be up against Mazraoui. If he starts on the right, he'll be up against Dallo, who I think are two very good players to target fouls this season, as we've seen sort of Man United play a bit more aggressive in their approach, a bit more aggressive with their press. Dallo and Mazraoui have been good targets for fouls. Um, if we just look into their data, we can see Mazraoui made 2,000 his last game against Spurs, averaging 1.42 fouls per 90 since making the move to Man United. And Dallo slightly above him. Obviously, we've seen he's blanked in games against Palace and FC 20 and Barnsley, but Man United were very, very dominant in those games, and that won't necessarily be the case against Aston Villa. I think we'll see a more even split of possession. And again, if he draws the match for Philogene, it's an ideal one for making fouls. We've seen Dallo against Southampton, who really struggled against Tyler Dibling, who is quite similar in the sense that he is aggressive in taking on his man. He'll sort of look to get 1v1, whereas Dallo didn't really have that against any of the teams he blanked against. So Dallo, if he is to be up against Philogene, I like his prices, but again, we'll have to wait for lineups, or a bit more certainty on lineups. Um, so that'll be it for the Man United game. The final game is Brighton against Tottenham, 4:30 kickoff on Sunday at the Amex. Brighton were dealt their first loss of the season against Chelsea, um, who really punished the high line. I think it was a clinical display from Cole Palmer, obviously, but Brighton just did not look like an unbeaten side at all. I think they were so easily bypassed. They were just giving up chances at will, and they were rightfully punished. For Tottenham, they face a midweek trip to Budapest after they dealt with United at Old Trafford. In terms of the injury report, it's quite an interesting one for Brighton, as they've got 8 players listed. The most notable one being Van Hecke, who will miss out, and that likely gives Webster another start, which is just again not ideal. João Pedro is also 50-50, as is Joel Veltman. We've got key players for Brighton who are likely to miss out on this game. For Tottenham, we've got Heung-min Son listed on the injury report, alongside Udogi. So again, expected changes for Spurs on the sort of left flank. It will most likely be Werner and Jed Spence to start in their sort of absence. But I am very interested in this game. I think it has the potential to be quite goal laden. It's two attack minded sides, and that's reflected in the goals prices. So over 2.5 is just 1.36. Both teams to score is the same price, 1.36. BTTS and over 2.5 goals, 1.53. So very, very short. Market is expecting sort of action at both ends. And it's worth noting that both sides play a very high line, as I mentioned in the United sort of section. Um, and that I think lends itself to being quite like a duel heavy game, especially in midfield. So with that in mind, my first angle is for Balaba to make 2 fouls, which is priced at 1.73 with Sky. Again, I took this last week. It's shortened a bit, but it's still backable. As a single, or potentially you can double with one of the Spurs players to draw a foul, something that's correlated that will boost the odds. But I think he draws a perfect matchup against Spurs, who drew the most fouls in the league last season under Ange Postecoglou. You'll find duels against the likes of Madison, Kulusevski, Bentancur in midfield, also potentially Pedro Porro, Dominic Solanke, Just players who are good on the ball, strong on the ball, and I think Balaba will struggle in those matchups. He is very aggressive in his press, and he can be slightly clumsy at times. So he made no fouls against Chelsea, but he has landed at least 2 fouls in 3 out of 6 starts. I backed him in the game against Chelsea and in the game before that against Forest. And in that Forest game, he made 2 fouls. He was booked. He had an advantage played for his third foul, and he was subbed after 60 minutes. So I think it's just a testament to how he plays. Very, very aggressive. And against a side like Spurs, I think it's just a perfect matchup. I'd probably have this a fair price, close to 1.5. So again, just taking the value, which is an offer with Sky. And on a similar sort of note, Kulusevski to be fouled is 1.72 with Paddy. For context, he's 1.36 with Sky, which again I would say is more of a fair price. I just think Paddy Power has been very slow to adjust the fact that he's been playing in a sort of central midfield role as opposed to being out on the wing, and that in turn has led to him seeing a lot more of the ball. He's drawn a foul in 4 out of 5 league games, only failing against Brentford, but that was when Brentford sat very deep. So when Kulusevski was involved on the ball, it was sort of in and around his own box in the final third, which is not an ideal place to draw fouls. Against Brighton, as I say, both sides play a very high line, so I think there'll be a lot of duels in midfield. If Kulusevski can pick up the ball in and around the sort of halfway line, that's an ideal place for him. And given his sort of propensity to carry in a similar vein to Morgan Rogers, he's just such a good matchup for drawing fouls. Um, Brighton are very aggressive in their press through their midfielders, Balaba, as I mentioned, and Rifa. So I just think 1.72 is way too big. That's all for the fouls. The next two are some shots on target bets, and a player who I really like is Dominic Solanke. Um, he doesn't get provided with too many chances for Spurs. I think he's he hasn't had too many shots. I think Brennan Johnson's actually had more shots than him this season. But of the chances he does get, they're of such a high quality nature that again I'm focused on the shots on target prices as opposed to his shot prices. So he's 1.57. Your player is a central striker, and I really like his matchup against this Brighton team, who obviously looked really, really poor against Chelsea. If we look into Solanke's shot stats, he had 3 shots, 3 on target against Leicester, 4 shots, 3 on target against Brentford, 4 shots, 3 on target against Man United. He's also scored in 3 straight games. Should be full of confidence. And as I say, just a large majority of his shots are on target. The only miss for this bet was against Arsenal. He had 2 shots, none on target, but he did draw the much tougher matchup against the likes of Saliba and Gabriel. Brighton are just simply not on that level. If you think he'll be up against Lewis Dunk and Webster, you'd really, really fancy Solanke. Another player who has fantastic data is Brennan Johnson, and you can back him to have a shot on target at 1.83 with Bet365. And this selection has landed in 7 out of 8 appearances for him this season, and he's also scored in his last 4 games straight. If you think about how he played against Man United, he was sort of very aggressive from the offset. Obviously, scored in the first 2 minutes, then he hit the post, and he also had another good chance. So he had 3 chances for a shot on target, landed it straight away, but um, all of those were notably before the red card. So it wasn't sort of affected by Man United being down to 10 men. I really like his, so from a tactical perspective as well in this game, with Brighton playing a high line and being very aggressive in their press, I think it lends itself to backing the sort of attacking players to have shots on target because Brennan Johnson is a massive transitional threat, probably behind Werner, the biggest for Spurs. And I think because of that, he has the potential to be provided with some very good chances, especially in transition. Um, which again, perfect matchup. I think if it was a sort of more low block side, he'd be sort of thrust out wide, not getting into very good positions. But against Brighton, I think he should at times be the furthest man forward alongside Werner. So I like his shot on target price at 1.83. Doing a bit of odds comparison, this same bet is 1.66 with Paddy, 1.73 with Sky. So again, 365 is top price, which is ideal. I think the matchup's really good. The data is obviously solid. It's landed in 7 out of 8 games. So getting 1.83 for that, I think is quality, just good value, and you sort of have to take that when it becomes available. Um, so that's all the bets for this weekend. I will be doing a bit more of I'll be doing a sort of long written thread on this Brighton game just because it is still quite far away. Obviously, it's Sunday afternoon. We're only Thursday now at the time of recording. So still sort of a lot that can change at that time. Same for the Man United Aston Villa game. But for now, these are just sort of some early angles for those that like to sort of take the early lines. But as I say, that's all. Thank you very much for supporting. Thank you for all those that joined live. Thank you for your comments and interactions. Remember to stay tuned on Twitter. I'll be sort of covering a few more bets, I would imagine, for these games and sort of confirming what doubles to do. Obviously, I mentioned quite a lot of bets that were sort of around the 1.6 mark that would need to be paired with something, and I'll confirm those all on Twitter. Same for Telegram. All my bets will be posted there. That will have my staking plan and everything. So again, thank you for supporting. International break, so no stream next week. So I will join you in 2 weeks' time on Thursday. So thank you. Have a great day, and I will